I want you to think about something you used to do just for fun. Maybe it was drawing, maybe it was playing the guitar, maybe it was baking or woodworking or growing things in a garden. Something you did because, and this sounds almost radical to say out loud, because you liked it. Not because it was good for your career, not because you were building a brand, just because it made you feel good to do it. Now, hold that thing in your head. And let me tell you that I started running a while back. Nothing serious, just me, some bad music, and 30 minutes where my brain could just finally shut up. And it was good. Well, my lungs were on fire the first time, but it felt good for about 2 weeks. And then, I don't know exactly when it happened, but at some point I found myself at my laptop Googling how to make money running in your late 20s. I wasn't even fast. I hadn't even bought proper shoes yet, but something in my brain had already decided that just enjoying it wasn't enough. That if it wasn't going somewhere, it was going nowhere. And maybe you've never Googled that exact thing, but I'd bet you have had a version of that moment. The pottery class that made you wonder if you could sell that thing on Etsy. The recipe that made you think about starting a food account. The guitar you picked up and then quietly put back down because you weren't sure what the point was if you weren't going to do something with it. That feeling, that anxiety, that low hum of guilt when you're doing something that isn't productive. That's what this video is about. Here is something that might surprise you. This feeling of guilt we just talked about when you're doing something unproductive, when you're just sitting, just playing or being, that guilt is not modern. It's not only a social media thing. It's not a Silicon Valley thing. It's about 500 years old. In the 1500s, a theological idea started spreading across Northern Europe that would quietly rewire the entire Western relationship with work. It came out of a branch of Christianity called Calvinism, and the core of it went something like this. God has already decided who is saved and who is not. You can't change that. But here is the thing. If you are disciplined, if you are productive, if you work hard, that might be a sign, a signal from God that you are one of the chosen ones. So idleness wasn't just laziness anymore. It was practically a sin. The devil finds work for idle hands. You've heard that phrase before. It's older than America. And what happened over the following centuries is fascinating. The religion faded, church attendance dropped, theology moved to the background, but the moral architecture around work, well, that stayed. It just got secularized. The Puritan became the entrepreneur. The theological duty became the self-help book. And God got replaced by GDP. But the underlying message never changed. Your worth is tied to your output. A German sociologist named Max Weber wrote about this in 1905. He called it the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. And his argument was essentially that modern capitalism didn't just emerge from economics. It emerged from the deeply embedded moral belief that productivity is virtuous. That working hard is not just practical, it's moral. Now, why does this matter for a video about hobbies? Because it means that the voice in your head that questions whether your hobby is worth it, whether you should be doing something more useful with your time, that voice has a history, a long one. It was built over centuries into cultural DNA of Western society. And it runs especially deep in America, where the mythology of the self-made man, the immigrant who worked their way up from nothing, the idea that anyone can make it if they just work hard enough, that mythology made the Protestant work ethic essentially the national religion. Think about this. The United States is one of the only wealthy countries in the world with no federally mandated paid vacation time. None. Most European countries guarantee 4, 5, even 6 weeks. US citizens, on average, take less time off than workers in almost every comparable nation. And a huge chunk don't even use the days they are given. Not because they can't, but because they feel guilty when they do. And some people saw this clearly a long time ago. In 1932, long before Instagram, long before hustle culture had a name, a British philosopher named Bertrand Russell sat down and wrote an essay called In Praise of Idleness. And in it, he wrote something that shouldn't have been overlooked by Western civilization. The morality of work is the morality of slaves, and the modern world has no need of slavery. Russell's argument was a simple and radical one. The glorification of work wasn't wisdom. It was a story that powerful people told to keep everyone else busy. Leisure wasn't laziness, it was the space where human beings actually lived, where culture happened, where joy happened, but nobody particularly listened. You have the link of this essay in description. It's only 12 pages long, so give it a read. So when you pick up a guitar and your brain immediately starts asking whether you could perform somewhere, whether you could get good enough to teach, whether there's an angle here, you are not being neurotic. You are being 500 years of culture conditioning. The ground was already prepared long before any of us were born. But something happened more recently that took that ancient guilt and put it on steroids. Something that gave it a name, a brand, and a very large social media following. So we've established the ground, centuries of cultural conditioning that tied your moral worth to your productivity. That's the foundation. But foundations don't build houses on their own. Something had to come along and construct that specific world we are living in right now. Something that took the ancient guild and turned it into a lifestyle, a brand, an entire economy. That something was 2008. When the financial crisis hit, it didn't just wipe out savings and jobs. It wiped out the idea of security, the implicit deal that had existed for generations. You worked hard, you get stability. That deal visibly, publicly collapsed. And from that collapse, a new logic emerged. If no employer could guarantee your security, then you had to generate it yourself. Multiple income streams, side projects, always building something. On the surface, that sounds reasonable, practical even. But watch what happens next. The survival strategy, born out of genuine economic fear, gets repackaged. It gets aesthetics and it gets spokespeople. And suddenly, it's not a response to precarity anymore. It's a philosophy, it's an identity, and it has a name. Hustle culture. And nobody sold it harder than Gary Vaynerchuk. If you don't know him, but you know him, Gary V built a media empire on one essential message. You are not working hard enough. Sleep less, do more. Your 9 to 5 is making someone else rich. What are you doing with your evenings? He was influential. He was filling stadiums because he was speaking directly to a generation that was already anxious, already economically unstable, and handing them a framework that made the anxiety feel like fuel. A journalist named Erin Griffith wrote a piece in the New York Times in 2019 called "Why Are Young People Pretending to Love Work?" And in it, she described something that I think is exactly right. Hustle culture didn't just change how people worked, it changed how people felt about themselves if they weren't working. Leisure became something you had to earn. Rest became a reward for the productive, not a right for the living. And then it swallowed hobbies completely. Because platforms like YouTube, Etsy, and Patreon did something genuinely interesting. They created real ways for people to make money doing things they love, which sounds wonderful. And it really is wonderful. But there is a psychological side effect. Imagine you are painting in your room on a Saturday. You enjoy it, but you know that someone with the exact skill level has 200,000 followers on Instagram, sells prints on Etsy, and has a Patreon. You haven't failed at anything, but the existence of the path not taken makes the simple act of painting for pleasure feel like a choice to stay small. The platform economy turned every hobby into a visible market. And once you can see the market, it's very hard to unsee it. And the metric of success for a hobby shifted. Before monetization, platforms, and social media, the measure of a hobby was internal. Did you enjoy it? Did you get better? The feedback loop was between you and the activity. Social media inserted a new metric, the audience. Now there is a number, likes, views, followers, comments, and that number becomes the measure of whether the hobby is working or not. Derek Thompson at The Atlantic called this workism, the transformation of work from something you do into something you are. Your job, your hustle, your passion project, these aren't just activities anymore. They are the primary source of your identity, your community, and your sense of purpose. Which would be fine, maybe, if it weren't a choice. But it doesn't feel like a choice anymore. It feels like the air. And here is the thing about air. You don't notice it until someone starts taking it away from you. So who's doing that? Who actually benefits from all this? Maybe none of this was an accident. Not a conspiracy. Nothing as dramatic as a room full of people in suits deciding to ruin your Saturday afternoon pottery session. But something that doesn't need a mastermind because it runs on its own logic. A system that needs you to feel this way and rewards everything that keeps you feeling it. Think about who benefits from a workforce that monetizes its own leisure, that feels guilty resting, that self-optimizes without being asked, that has so thoroughly internalized the idea of productivity as a virtue that it disciplines itself, no manager required. Philosopher Michael Foucault had a famous illustration called panopticon, a prison where a single guard tower sits at the center of a circular building of cells. The guard can see into every cell, but the prisoners can't see the guard, so they never know if they are being watched at any given moment. The result? Well, they behave as if they are always being watched. The surveillance becomes internalized, and the prisoner becomes his own guard. In modern life, you became your own surveillance when the voice inside your head is constantly asking, should I be doing something more productive right now? Another philosopher named Byung-Chul Han took this further in his book The Burnout Society. His argument was that we've shifted from a society that tells you what you can't do into a society that tells you there is no limit to what you can do. Achieve more, optimize more, be more, and that sounds like freedom. But Hans' point is that it's actually a more total form of control, because now the exploitation has no ceiling, and the person doing it is you. Mark Fisher called the broader version of this capitalist realism, the idea that capitalism has become so deeply naturalized, so integrated into how we understand reality, that we've lost the ability to imagine anything outside it. It's easier, Fisher wrote, to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. And when a system becomes that invisible, it stops needing to justify itself. It just is. But let's make this concrete, because there are real, identifiable beneficiaries of this constantly working thing. The platform economy needs content. YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, their entire business model is built on an endless supply of free material from people who believe their passion deserves an audience. The hobbyist who becomes a creator is performing labor for a platform that captures the revenue. The deal is dressed up as an opportunity. The asymmetry, though, is enormous. The vast majority of creators earn little to nothing. The median YouTuber, TikTok creator, and Etsy seller, they are not making a living. Next is the productivity industry. Self-help books, optimization apps, courses on monetizing your passion is worth billions of dollars. And its entire business model depends on you feeling behind, insufficient, in need of improvement. Your leisure guilt isn't a side effect of this industry, it's the product. And then there is this. GDP, the number we use to measure how well a society is doing, does not measure leisure. It doesn't measure joy or rest or the satisfaction of making something for nobody. A nation full of people who garden for pleasure, play music for themselves, read for the love of it, that generates no economic signal. But a nation full of people monetizing those same activities does. The very metrics we've built to understand collective well-being are structurally blind to the value of purposeless joy. And that shapes culture. That shapes what we quietly teach ourselves to value. And what we've taught ourselves is this: if it doesn't produce, it doesn't count. There's one psychologist who spent decades studying one question: what actually makes human beings happy? Not successful, not productive, but happy. And what he found was this: the moments people describe as the most satisfying in their lives weren't the moments of achievement. They weren't promotions or launches or milestones. They were moments of complete absorption in something for its own sake. Painting without thinking about the painting. Playing music without thinking about the performance. Running without thinking about the data. He called this flow state. And the activities most likely to produce it share one characteristic: they are autotelic, meaning they are done for their own sake with no external reward. Here is the problem. The moment you introduce metrics, views, revenue, improvement targets, you destroy the conditions flow requires. You make the activity about something outside itself. And in doing so, you lose the exact thing that made it worth doing. A philosopher named Joseph Piper wrote something in 1948. He argued that leisure isn't the absence of work, is the foundation of culture. That everything which makes civilization worth the name, art, philosophy, music, genuine human connection, emerges from unoptimized, purposeless, free time. Take that away, and you don't just lose hobbies, you lose something harder to name, something that makes us distinctly human. We build a world where the metrics can't see that, where rest is economically invisible, where doing something purely for joy registers as nothing, no signal, no output, and no value. And we've started to believe the metrics. So here is what I want to leave you with. Not a solution. I don't think this is the kind of problem that has a simple solution, but a question. What would it mean to do something this week that you had absolutely no intention of sharing, selling, or getting better at? Something that existed only in the moment you were doing it. Something that was just yours. Maybe it's not that easy to identify that thing, but if you do, feel free to let me know in the comments what it is and make some time for it.